Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the December edition of SM Advanced Forum, your monthly roundup of news, views, and opinion in and around the technology and business of streaming. My name's Don Robinson, and I'm one of the usually four co-hosts. In fact, probably unfair to say that these days. It's sometimes four regular co-hosts. But as usual, I'm joined by my erstwhile MC for the day, Tim Siglin. Tim, let me unmute you and bring you to the camera. Are you out there?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can indeed. Perfect first time. The technology's working today. We're winning.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, and you'll notice behind me, I don't have the map of the world. It's a bit cold here, so I decided to move up from the basement to the kitchen slash dining
I
room.
was quite enjoying the basement vibe. It had triggered a technology swap off between certainly some of us in the warm up here, so I was quite enjoying that one. But yeah,
Very
anyway.
good. Well, so how are things? How are things in the UK for you? I mean, you can answer from a COVID standpoint, from a watching us in our crazy electoral process standpoint, or a business standpoint. How's life in the UK?
Well, I've been celebrating Thanksgiving. I think that was probably worth doing this year. Normally wouldn't, but this year it was probably. I was probably thankful you're the other side of the Atlantic. It doesn't look fun over there, so I feel sorry for you all, and my heart goes out to you all. But over here, we continue our headlong nosedive off a cliff into Brexit. I'm pretty sure that the latest vaccines that have been announced and are sitting in a depot in Brussels probably won't get across the channel thanks to Brexit, so that's going to be quite fun. And the conspiracy theories, as always, abound. No help, of course, because of streaming. But putting all that outside my door and deleting all my news feeds has been a good thing and left me focused on work and business, which is going well. Everyone seems to be streaming, and that's no bad thing in my opinion.
So there's this story, of course, from one of the previous world wars where a bunch of small boats came off from fairly close to where you are. You know, you're close to Brighton, so you're on the channel, came over to rescue soldiers on the European side. Could you organize a flotilla to go over and pick up the vaccines and bring them back? Would that be something you could do in your spare time?
I'm not sure I can afford the time off work for the quarantine each side of the channel, so it probably won't be me doing that. I'm afraid I'm just going to sit and wear my mask when I go out instead. So
Right.
an adaptable snood now. It makes me feel like a skier or a snowboarder. It's kind of cool, but.
And of course, we went through Guy Fawkes Day, where wearing masks was a popular thing at a particular time. That was this past month, wasn't it?
Yes, I believe we burnt random strangers in the street or did whatever we normally do in our rural villages in the country. But we didn't do them in it. We did that all socially distanced, so you had to be more than 2 meters away from the fire, I think. Something like that. Making this all up on the spot. So I don't know. But I do find it funny that the conspiracy theorists who always wanted to wear masks and hoodies in the shopping centres to avoid CCTV and face recognition are now really against wearing masks and hoodies because of some liberty problem. It's confusing as hell. I don't know. Glad I'm not a president anyway.
All right. So to the almost far north, Eric up in Wisconsin. Been a couple months, I think, since you've been able to be on as a host. What's been exciting in
It
that?
has been a while, hasn't it? Yeah, we're muddling along up here in Wisconsin. It's finally turning to winter. Getting cold outside. No real snow yet. We had a snow last week. It didn't last long, but
Your picture on Facebook of snow was actually our snow last week too, and
I saw that.
It caused school closures. So
Of
for
course it
us,
did.
half an inch, is enough to have an apocalypse if we
Right. Whereas in Wisconsin, inch of snow might be enough to put shoes on instead of sandals. I gave some thought to it. I actually have a sweater on today. I'm moving along here, but yeah, we're doing great. What else is new up here that we're all not going through? And I mean that is one of the interesting things, isn't it? Allan asked before we went live how we're all doing, and in part because of streaming, certain things are now universal that might not have been before. The experiences of those of us in the States are impacting folks like Madelon in Amsterdam. and what's happening in Tennessee or San Francisco, where Tim and Allan respectively are, it has an effect on us everywhere. So, but what have we been working on? I suppose we should talk about streaming a bit. Here at Streaming Media, we just published our State of Streaming Autumn 2020 report. Tim actually wrote that, and I helped him work on that. It was sponsored by Zixi. We did a report earlier in the year, and we were only going to do one State of the Streaming Industry report this year, but things are changing so rapidly that we thought it was a good idea to do a second. And I think if you could sum up what we found, it was that, we all know, and we've all seen the numbers about how consumer streaming during the pandemic has exploded. But what it's really done in terms of within the industry is it's accelerated some trends that were already in motion, particularly moving workflows to the cloud, embracing software-defined infrastructures if you hadn't done that already. Those things were happening and were going to happen for those who hadn't embraced them yet anyway. But boy, the last 6 months of people needing to work remotely has certainly accelerated that. Tim, do you have any specifics you'd like to go into about that?
Yeah, I mean, two things on that. And of course, I wrote the article here recently, and people can read that on streamingmedia.com and download the infographic and download the full report. But what I found fascinating, Eric, and this was sort of the surprise to me. We knew software-defined infrastructures, we knew the cloud, and I still am a believer that there's a hybrid model between cloud and on-prem. But at this point, having the pendulum swing almost fully to cloud allowed for that workforce flexibility. It wasn't as much about, is it the best scenario for putting your streaming infrastructure together? It was much more about the fact that suddenly we can't have all these engineers who would normally sit in the same room, cubicle to cubicle, doing work, and therefore we need to push it out into a much more software-defined infrastructure. The other thing that was fascinating was even with the drop-off in sports on between the first one that we launched back or published back in March and the one that we published in November, what we saw was obviously a very nice uptick in houses of worship, education, and other sort of smaller groups that had been interested in streaming, but now are fully embracing it because of their own requirements through the lockdown. Do I think we're going to run into things like Zoom fatigue? Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, we all look forward to a point where we can, if we want to, hop a plane to Amsterdam for IBC or go out to Silicon Valley, to do work like we've always done. But can we continue to function now, from a business standpoint? Absolutely. And I think that was fascinating.
Yeah. And I'll just add on there, something that, came up in the study and is, as you said, the way religious organizations, churches, synagogues, mosques are embracing streaming. Someone had a really interesting point the other day in a discussion I witnessed online where on one hand, there are many people who, of course, are saying, look, the experience is not the same, right? Just like the experience of going to a concert or attending a sporting event versus watching it on a screen is not the same. But this person suggested, and I wonder if they're right, that what people have the ability to do now is not feel tied geographically to the church that is in their neighborhood, even if it's the church they grew up in.
That's it.
And maybe, in fact, more inclined to find a place they feel more comfortable or more welcome, or you know how it is, right? If you don't really like the priest or the pastor, you might not go every Sunday. Some folks don't go at all, but that's neither here nor there. But
and I think
finding communities and experiences that are more rewarding to them.
And in fact, what's interesting, I had helped our church set up streaming a couple years ago. And what they've noticed is topics that were, sort of traditional Sunday sermons 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, are suddenly trending very high on the app that they have. And so as a result, they're using that to also know the kinds of things that they need to put more effort behind in terms of, future services to the physical community. So it works both ways. The ministry teams themselves are getting a feedback in a way that they wouldn't if it's just people sitting in the pews. But they're also getting a significant number of people. And we're talking, I live in a town of 40,000 people. We're talking significant numbers of views from California, significant numbers of views from New York State, places where people can't go. They are seeking out and trying to find something. And I think, to your point precisely, they may find something that they like there that they can't really physically get locally if they, don't have that option.
So there's an interesting comparison. I every now and then I get off my lazy backside and do some exercise, and I play capoeira, and it's reasonably difficult to synchronize with the group because it's quite a niche sport and it's done in very small groups. So if you lose touch with the group, you've got to track them down on their Facebook group and find out where they're practicing next and so on. But obviously with the lockdowns, the capoeira master started doing twice a week classes online, which have been much more accessible. And interestingly, the class or the group that I play with expanded, and suddenly people from Cyprus and northern France and all over Europe were tuning into these practice sessions because where they lived there were no capoeira groups at all. So again, I think that's reinforces this idea that you start a fitness class for a local group, but actually the fact that you've taken it onto streaming has suddenly massively enlarged what you might possibly be able to do. So streaming's taken that educational step by force this year, I think.
One of the things, Dom, that I've found interesting is, part of my background was crisis management PR. And when we started streaming, we had to remind him that this is going to people beyond just the local area. So you don't necessarily want to say the names of your kids or, which section of town you live in. So there are both those positive consequences and those potentially negative consequences, from a stalker standpoint or something like that. But that's fascinating that you're seeing that there. Now, you and I had that conversation early on with the yoga instructor asking how to, stand on our head and do have a microphone that wouldn't fall off. And then you've also done the whole social distancing dance parties. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, and they continue, and it's turned into lots of Christmas parties over the next couple of weeks, and we've got some fairly big Zoom parties coming together where we're actually converging two different Zoom groups, but with it's complicated. One massive Zoom event, but with two different DJs playing, which is going to be quite interesting for New Year's Eve. And we've got we're sort of hiring the platform out now to corporates that are doing end of year parties. And of course, they'd normally it'd be little more than an office party for them, but suddenly they've got 200-300 people signing up to come and basically, text chat while waving and looking silly at cameras and listening to some DJs and doing all that sort of interaction. And even when the lockdowns were really lifted over here, the communities that have formed within those dance parties are ridiculously strong and steadily virally growing. So, yeah, it's definitely been a year that it's come of age.
If you've got corporates who are hiring it out, they could also use it as a sales opportunity too, because obviously anybody who shows up for their Christmas party.
Yeah, we're doing. I mean, we're pushing branded quizzes through we've got kind of interactive HTML elements, and we're pushing branded quizzes, and we're pushing slides with visuals on. We've got all the corporate logos are all animated in flames, and it's all quite basic. It's all done with freeware, more or less. But putting it all together in the right format and making it accessible is passing the time and entertaining people. So, yeah. Listen, we could natter all afternoon, but we've got important people in the wings. So we've overrun this week. Let's move on.
So we'll start first with Madelon. Madelon, introduce yourself. Of course, Eric mentioned you're in Amsterdam. Tell us what company you work for and sort of your time in the industry.
Yes, sure. My name is Madelon Olsthoorn, and I work currently for 24i, which is an amino company. I've recently worked for Amino as well. So Amino is the company that acquired 24i about a year and a half ago. And 24i is a streaming application company who's also selling both front end and back end. So it's more turning into video experiences now. My background is mainly coming from the operator space. So I've always worked with operators throughout Holland. So something that really fascinates me is working around product innovation, marketing, and content, and everything tied together. Bringing me now into the vendor space, but still keeping in mind the end user and how the end user makes use of our services. In the end, they're the ones that paying it, at least. I've traveled a lot and lived a while in LA, where I met Allan, I think a long time ago, coincidentally. So it's always interesting to see how the industry brings us back together again in a way. And I'm also doing a supervisory board for the public Dutch broadcaster here, or one of the Dutch public broadcasters, which allows me to view things from a different perspective and also educate me on how they experience COVID and more on the content production side of things. So it's been very interesting for me. Yeah.
Now, is it Hilversum that is where sort of most of the studios are, if I remember correctly? Traditionally, it's been outside of Amsterdam in one of the smaller cities.
Yeah, it was. It's good that you know that. Traditionally, it was more outside of Amsterdam, so Hilversum. As everything is modernized, a lot of it moved into Amsterdam. So you would have Netflix, Disney Plus, The Zone. They're all based in Amsterdam, but there are still certain broadcasters that are out in Hilversum, and mostly the linear traditional guys that are still out there. But it's what we call the metropole, because in essence it's two cities. In LA it would be all one, because Hilversum is only 20 minutes out of Amsterdam, so it's really nothing, to be honest.
It takes you longer to get to Anaheim, from Anaheim to LA than to get across most of the Netherlands, to be honest. So.
For sure it does. And so it doesn't matter that much in essence anyway. I mean, both cities are very good. Of course, I'm from the capital. I am from Amsterdam, so I would vouch for that. And many internationals prefer to live in Amsterdam. So a company like Netflix, it's good for them to find talent and people that are willing to move there as well, because it's a pleasant city to live. So they're a company that are still growing here, for instance. We're growing. Of course, COVID changed a lot of things, but in essence, we're growing as a company here.
And from a company standpoint, does it allow you to look for, has COVID allowed you to look for talent outside of just the metropolitan area where the offices may be located? And I was sort of wondering the same thing for the linear guys. If they can't all be together in the same place, how are the operators handling both the growth and also what Eric and I were talking about with the moves to things like software-defined infrastructures?
So yeah, I would think that there's less stress on having people move, so we wouldn't do that. I think working for more technology company, we're not so fuzzy about that anyway. So I think a lot of our developers are already across certain cities and places. We have offices in Finland, Madrid, Czech. And if talent is really talented, I think they can work from home already. So on a developer perspective, not so much. On a commercial perspective, I think we would normally work more with people located in certain locations, where we are maybe becoming less selective of that. One of the big operators here already announced that they're going to move into a 2-day at the office, 3-day from home forever kind of policy. So that will be a big change, and that will allow you to have more talent through Europe, because in essence you can work anywhere. But the biggest obstacle for a lot of firms is still the language. So if the company is willing to do all their business in English, then it's easy. If it's a little bit more traditional business in Germany or in Holland or in France, it's most likely you have to learn the language before you can fully integrate, if you really want to work there on a daily basis, I would think.
Okay, good. Thank you. That's a really good perspective. Allan, you're out on the West Coast, if I remember from what Eric said, but you're a Canadian citizen as well. So give us the dual perspective on how life in the media world is going these days. And I think you may be muted. Let Dom unmute you here real quick. There you go.
I am muted. Great. Well, good morning, first of all, to everyone, wherever everyone is. It's nice to see those on this screen as well, because I've seen and worked and socialized with each of you in other parts of the world. As Madelon said, we did meet many, many years ago and I'm still a mentor with the Dutch consulate here in San Francisco. So I have the fortune of having that connection to really great people and really great communities throughout the Netherlands. And I really embrace that. I'm Allan McLennan. I'm the chief executive with Pata Media Group. Pata Media Group is here in San Francisco. So we're having a around the world conversation right now, at least from North America to the EU and UK. The situation that we've been facing here in the States is multifaceted. I mean, we've talked about politics and the angst that's going on with that, but we're also bringing up the fact that, much like what happened with the telephone, the party lines and the farms, the ease and communication and the connection, we're going through that whole new change right at the moment of being able to engage with each other with little tiles on the screen. I think it makes a difference knowing someone, like knowing you. But from a societal and cultural standpoint, we're embracing the capabilities of streaming. Where do you want to start when it comes to what the impact is on all of us? I think you brought something up very critical, and that is with your church and you're reaching out to new audiences around the world. That's the key here, is being able to tap into all kinds of different ways of thinking and ways of interest to engage in conversations that were not really available before because of whatever reason, social biases or engagements or community isolation, whatever it might be, no longer we have to really deal with that. But there's one thing that's really critical, and that is, while this is an incredibly efficient means of communicating and connecting, I believe what we've discovered through a lot of pain and angst with individuals is that we still need to have physical engagement in some capacity, whether it's, and Madelon, I love the fact, what you mentioned before, on others, is being able to come back to the office for 2-3 days a week. Totally get it. Because at this particular time, and we can drill into many components of this, but I believe it's more efficient when you're able to get together physically in the simplicity of walking down the hallway and checking into, the person's office or the conference room, albeit now a little social distanced, and checking on a project. What we've really brought ourselves down to are highly efficient 30-minute, half-hour, 60-minute calls that we're able to engage and show projects. Yes, that's all great. But to move projects forward and to move, let's say in this particular case, the one critical need is building business offerings and business models. And while it's cool to get together with calls and meetings via Zoom, it doesn't generate the revenues that companies need to have. And new business models are really being strained at this time because the events and other kinds of means of being able to engage together that we've been used to sponsoring or participating or being engaged to speak doesn't exist anymore. Some of the new models I received an invitation just this last week for one online 3-day session for $449. It's like, well, just a minute. If I was going to Prague or something and having a conversation, okay, I'll do that. But online, not so much. So sales cycles have been impacted. Critical, important projects have been impacted. And the need that we're starting to move, and let's hope these vaccines start coming into play and we'll feel confident to be able to do it, have been embraced. And now we're going to be moving forward on a number of things. The reason why I said that, if you wanted me to kind of go over a little bit of some of the process, been working on a number of different things around the world. In this particular case, probably some of the more interesting ones in education on twofold. As a board member of something called the Center for Educational Innovation, We've been working with different fiber carriers around the country because there's a real need in the United States to help connect the digital divide. And we're coming up into a period in the coming months, something called the HEROES Act. And the HEROES Act here in the United States is something that teachers know their children, and they know their children's homes and lower social economic families aren't connected to the networks. And so the entire premise of the HEROES Act and the entire premise of how we're working through innovation with carriers is being able to develop the models to be able to engage with the schools, to be able to connect with the kids. In all of that, there's fascinating new technologies that really will have an impact on our business in media and entertainment. And what we've discovered on that project is that the synergies and similarities between entertainment and education are really starting to really morph together. Streaming capabilities, data analytics, a fascinating network. To give you an example here in the States called the INYA, the Educational Network of America. And they have a platform that basically can tell how long the students engaged, if they're committed, if they're involved, how, I can keep on going on. Now, how reflective is that to television programming? This sort of thing. So there's some areas that we're working on right at the moment that really cross over and can develop and present that. Another project it's working on is building out the first actually tri-level interactive, family interactive and educational platform. What's that said? We have about 4 million students, 1 million teachers, right now being able to cover about 35 million homes, 300 million devices, to being able to deliver both engaged interactive education, as well as family involvement, as well as the streaming of factual kind of video on demand. Very interesting new platform that will allow for this to all come into play. What am I saying there? There is the exact example that I just mentioned. It's a combination of education and video on demand and streaming that's coming into play. So all of this is really reflective on what we're talking about today. And I don't want to take up too much time. The fact of it is, we're spot on with this discussion, and I'm looking forward to participating. Thank you.
And I'll add, Alan, several of us on here actually have spouses who are teachers, and they're facing the exact challenges you're describing. I actually had a conversation on Thanksgiving Day with someone who's a teacher that focuses just on doing online. And I was describing to him precisely those, when did they log in, how long are they engaged, things that we use in the entertainment space to try, or even in enterprise with OSHA tracking of, whether somebody's watched a safety video, and how it's been surprising how that hasn't made its way into education. So you're saying that, that essentially there are platforms that are now thinking that way in terms of the analytics of education, just like they are with the analytics of entertainment?
No question. I wouldn't even compare that. It's not like entertainment. It is literally focused by teachers, built by administrators, being able to address this situation. Brilliant things when it comes to analytics. And those of us that live and breathe media and advertising, it is truly incredible when you can actually watch how someone interacts. And then let me give you an example with CEI. Back in the day, back in March, which seems like, guys, doesn't it seem like a long time ago?
That was the month I got married, so I can tell you it's exactly 8 months ago. But yeah, it does feel.
Well, that's a whole other time frame.
Yeah,
but the thing is that when we looked at, all of this coming down, the ability to actually gauge how someone's interacting with the program is no longer based on the advertising metrics that have been so advocated within the industry. Now it's true online interaction and also television viewing via the platforms that we're working with. And yes, and answer your question, yes, there is. I'm happy to share that with us. We can talk about that. And in the course of the new types of platform, let's face it, there's been efforts over 30 years of being able to engage schools via satellites and via networks, interactive networks that were based on distributing content, distributing news, distributing special events, whatever it might be. That now has come together and is being able to have a teacher, and we're developing this, and this is already real, being able to have a classroom online that's able to pull in and show a news clip, the specifics for their workload, for their classroom to be able to discuss all live, and then being able to take that at night. And the one thing that's, as your teachers, you know what this is, the parents are missing out on this. So parents are a very key component. It's not just the teachers, is how are the kids doing? How can they contribute? How can they participate? It's a percentage. Some don't, but a lot do. So in answer to your question, yes, there are some platforms. To give you an example, kind of carving through all these, I've been reviewing 3,500 different types of educational applications, 3,500, and in the course of those applications of being able to have different kinds of engagements and means of being able to deliver curriculum, which is programming, it's a challenge. So having that expertise of being able to serve that up from an aggregation standpoint and making recommendations of who and how they can be able to select the content or the way to connect with their students is becoming really, really interesting. That, in answer to your question, Tim, I believe is one of those evolutionary steps that will move over. I hadn't thought about it until just now, but it's kind of like one of those things that will move over into television because the engagement that we're experiencing. And just a plug for all of us old ITV junkies that were a part of Milia back in the mid-90s, interactive TV is coming to bear. It's real, and interactive television back at that time, and the platforms, interestingly enough, are kind of the evolutionary aspect of streaming television. We just happen to be now getting to a point, which what we have right here, engagement. And so that's pretty cool.
That's very fascinating. In fact, I worked in business television systems back then, and we'd go to Telecon and some of these other shows and see interactive, and you're absolutely right. It sort of feels like we've made it to what the promise and hype was back then, but the technology wasn't really there to get us there. And now we have the technology in play. So
yeah, there is. And let me just jump on that for just a second. And the world has recognized it. It's like we were just talking and getting together with our audio levels and things prior to going live. And Dom, I'm going to throw this back to you because there's one of the things that the governments right now, and this is a big question around the world, is how governments are going to now manage this direct connection that media has with every one of their citizens, and us being able to regulate it. That's going to be really key. And an article that Streaming Media just in Advanced Forum just posted on Canada's efforts on this is really interesting.
Let me try and bring that up. Hold on a sec. There we go. So yeah, moves to regulate OTT. Eric, you forwarded that to me. Have you got a moment to give us a quick précis of what the article's about? You'll need to unmute.
Sorry, I was muted. It's similar to what we've seen in some European countries where there needs to be a certain percentage of locally produced content or locally licensed content on any streaming service. Otherwise, that streaming service, whether it's or the ISP that's delivering it, will face pretty significant fines. Now, in reality, whether or not Rogers in Canada is going to kick Netflix off its network is a different question, right? But Allan, you've had experience in Canada, and specifically, you mentioned before that you might have some insights on that.
Well, no, I think like Rogers and Shaw tell us, all of the different platforms and the providers in Canada are really embracing this capability of interactivity. If they're going to be able to move that quickly, as Canadians have over the years, comparatively to the U.S., I think is going to be left to be seen. But right at the moment, they have definitely embraced different kinds of platforms like Zone TV that allows for streaming as well as interactivity. And that right at the moment with Shaw's and Rogers particularly, in combination with Comcast, they're looking at how they can advance their boxes that are in every one of their homes. I think that's kind of one of the more interesting points too, and not to take this a different direction, but at least complement it. And that is what's been really interesting over the last 3 or 4 months has been platforms, service providers like 11 or Movie Star, and when we're talking about the different kinds of networks, buying technologies and becoming technology providers, because they were spending so much on their infrastructure demands that they just looked at it, and part of the rationale, I'm sure, was, well, why don't we just buy this? So, just recently, a Movie Star, is launching a Wi-Fi 6 amplifier. What MVPD or what OTT service has ever gotten to that, to be able to put a device in their viewers' homes that can help amplify broadcast signals? 11 buying a workflow platform. So everyone, and I don't say everyone, but the smart players are recognizing that they don't want to be vendor locked, and they're starting to really understand that this is here to stay, and they need to participate on that.
And Allan, I think this is a sort of nice segue to Madelon, because obviously Amino started as a set-top box company, and obviously with buying 24i and looking at, as you say, sort of moving to better boxes, and better boxes may include a lot of data and analytics. So Madelon, I know one of the topics you wanted to talk about was around data and analytics and streaming. Every time I ask Eric to write an article on metadata, he sort of groans and is like, okay, yeah, fine. I guess we need one of those.
I always read them, Tim. I always read them. I always read your articles on metadata.
Well, at least I know at least one person besides me and Eric are reading it. But Madelon, the point on data and analytics and streaming obviously being something that we can do beyond what has been done in traditional television, where does that sort of lead us as we move into things like interactive TV and other services that streaming can provide?
Yeah, I think there's several ways how you can look at it. I think one of the things that we really see, and probably you see as well, is the amount of choice, and to bring that choice in an aggregated way back to the end user. So what you see more in the IPTV arena is that services are being combined, and people will use a traditional menu, if you will, but use the applications on top of that. One of my questions or topics to debate is what happens with that data, because the operator only will see the linear stuff with that, and the app usage will go to Netflix or Disney or whoever in that case. And the question will be how the operator can deal with that on the one hand that we see. And on the other hand, there's of course the streaming services itself, where you see a wide arena of streaming services that are being deployed currently, where there's a difference also in Europe versus the US, because the niche market is easier in the US to reach due to the language and the amount of people that it has. So in Europe, that is way more scattered. You need different applications, and that means that, the reach is less, so your budget is a little bit less in that way as well. But of course, we can work with a lot of data topics, but what we see is that there's not really one way to deal with that. And in the end, I believe video is data. So you need to know who's doing what to improve the streaming or improve the UI or engage it with your audience or to increase on your monetization. The question is how that is already be picked up since everything is so scattered throughout the chain. So there's different ways that you can play around with this, where I think that for a long time we thought everybody would move fully into streaming because of the usability and fast UI and everything attached to it. But in essence, looking also from an Amino perspective, there's a lot of demand for Android, and we see the rise of RDK coming as well. So I don't know if the set-top box is gonna disappear. Maybe it's there to stay for a while, but in a different jacket than we originally thought, in a way.
Well,
Tim, Tim, if I could jump on that for just a second with Madelon, you know, when it comes to the boxes, absolutely, they're going to become more intelligent as you're talking about it. But the question, what I've heard you say, which was really fascinating, and that is the Amino platform of what you've been working on is really very much a platform that allows for all types of different offerings participate. In other words, the old adage of saying all ships will rise. You know, and that is something that is, I think, really important in the industry right at the moment, is that we're starting to find, instead of being isolated standalone products, there are products like what you have that will come in and allow for the existing products to work, but be able to be then connected into other kinds of services and insights. And that's real key for the evolution of a category in the industry. I heard that when you were saying that. I just wanted to kind of.
Yeah, no, but you're absolutely right. I think there's a tremendous growth happening there, and Comcast is doing it with their RDK Lightning. You have Android. Huawei has their own version as well. So there's more to come of that, and I think that is a combination where the user has both worlds in one hand through a remote, which, you know, somewhat they really enjoy in a way as well. But the data is not going to the centric landing page as it used to. The operators used to getting all the data directly, which for the streaming world, they do not receive that yet. Mm-hmm. The question is how they're going to deal with that. You know, no operator is strong enough against Netflix or Disney.
Right. Well, and even if we think about if you go back to the models of Replay TV and TiVo, where those services, you know, where the Replay getting sued out of existence, you know, we're now all doing, just like Napster, you know, in the beginning. But anyway, you sort of trace that history through there, and then to Roku, that started as, you know, as sticks as opposed to boxes, then went boxes, now is integrated in a ton of smart TVs, because the companies who build the smart TVs have figured out it's much easier to work with a platform like Amino or work with a platform like Roku to sort of encapsulate everything they have. Madelon, you mentioned Android. I may be the only proud owner of a Sony NS1 Google TV from like, you know, years ago that I had to, instead of typing on
Eric's
a regular
got his hand up.
I have one too.
Yeah, well, me too.
I have one too.
But we're geeks here too.
So clearly we have a niche group, Dom, just like your
I think we're gonna have to do geek device forums.
I really liked that interface. I could pick up that game controller, and I never played a PlayStation before, but I knew exactly how to type in all the searching and like that. The point being, it seems like we have companies that go through multiple iterations trying to figure out what the right path is from a user interface standpoint. But I hear you saying, Madelon, that essentially we've not really moved forward on the data and metadata side the way that the operators would sort of expect to get their information about consumer use. Is that sort of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think that is totally right, and that they cannot get it through that angle. So if you want to retrieve that information, you have to do it differently. But of course, they are in close alliance with the consumer, so they have different ways of, you know, asking the same question. And what they do see is that having everything stored in one place is of great usage to the consumer, but upselling their own premium services where they would be able to see their usage and see what's being done if you do HBO or Fox Sports is different than when you're upselling Disney or Netflix, where all the revenue goes directly to the streaming service and you have no idea with the data, with the usage or whatnot. But the fact that this happens still gives them a reason to stay. So it's important enough, because in the end, it's a lock-in to the broadband connection as well. And I mean, everyone is referring to the COVID situation that we're in, and the rise of broadband and Wi-Fi is tremendous, of course. So having a little less ARPU maybe on the TV side, but increasing your power on Wi-Fi and broadband will make them even stronger. I don't think the operators will suffer from a revenue perspective this year, to be honest.
You know, I'd like to take that, Tim. Sorry to interrupt. The fact of it is that you brought it up, and that is, you know, I think we're at a gating point right now. it's been with apps. It's like you put your app on your aggregator. You got a Roku or whatever it might be, and you have access to the different programming that's provided. I get it. That's a great business model where it's at. But we're starting to move into what Madelon just said, and that is there is a need for the ability to access on your television, on a large screen television, kind of back in the day with Samsung and, the initial first Chromecast that, like type in as hard as it was in the browser to pull something up to be able to watch it. But I think we're coming back to that a little bit, and it's going to be a little bit more efficient. Let me give you an example. Right now, as a member of the Producers Guild, we're receiving screeners that we've typically in the past always received DVDs to be able to look at the programming, the content, and to be able then to vote on it. We're no longer now. We have a code that's assigned to us. We're able to, we have to have that. But watching it on our laptops, just doesn't really present the quality of the programming that we're receiving. But yet within Roku or within Fire Stick, there's no ability to put in a browser window to be able to go to that secure site to be able to access it for the presentation capability. So somewhere in there that we're moving towards something like that.
We pulled those capabilities out of things like the early Google TV because they weren't consistent in their functionality. But you're absolutely right there. That's a huge point.
And I think that's also one of the challenges we see from a 24i perspective is in the app development. There's so many iterations through every device. There's so many devices. There are so many screens, and for an application to work seamlessly on those, that's pretty exhaustive, work in a way as well. So that also pointed out there is no truth at this point. Not every smart TV supports an application longer than 3 to 5 years, or people are buying new Rokus. A smart TV, you cannot really easily move. A new TV goes in the living room and not into the bedroom. So there's several challenges facing with the streaming world as well. And that's why, in this whole super aggregation world, you kind of bring things together again. But the user experience has to be very well. So that is why the AI and metadata, the enrichment of the UI is not something that can be ignored. But I don't think that is really to a next level yet. I think people are looking into it. Everything needs to become more contextual in a way, but that's maybe going to be the next step.
And you brought up ARPU earlier, and for people who don't know that, average revenue per user, the typical model we use for cell phones, and obviously we now use for streaming as well, or for ISPs. You were saying essentially that you felt like for the incumbent carriers, especially the ISPs, losing a little bit of ARPU, but being the glue that holds the consumer to be able to access is an acceptable model?
Oh, I would think yes. I think they can find other value-added service to add to their broadband, or maybe even to their TV services. Something like smart home might be next. There's a lot of stuff to do on the Wi-Fi section as well. So I think the fact that they still stick to the set-top box is already a big step forward to the projections that were made like 5 years ago. It doesn't mean that they lose the extra revenue from the premium services, but the customer still being sticky also provides them with an opportunity to upsell different stuff, maybe more on gaming. I don't know. There would be, security. There's several routes they can take there, I think.
Sure. Fair point. Eric, by the way, I know your son had been looking for a PS5. I found, and this goes to a point that Madelon was making, that Allan's made, which is, sort of set-top box and television. I went yesterday and actually bought a non-smart TV because they're a whole lot cheaper and already have boxes. But I saw a bundle of a 50-inch TV and a PS5 together that apparently people aren't buying. They'll buy the console, they'll buy the TV, but there were a number of these sitting in stock. I was just fascinated. I realized I couldn't ship that to you in the mail, but there are some bundles that may not necessarily work.
We did get a PS5, by the way.
Oh, good. Awesome. For less than $2,000, I'm hoping.
Less than $2,000, but more than list price. But we'll leave it at that.
Very good. All right. So Dom, we had one other topic I know you wanted to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
PTT. What does that stand
Yeah,
for?
I've been geeking out quite a bit this week. So I think I mentioned it on the last SMAF that I've been doing a bit of a clear out of tech, and that's a totally different story. But in the boxes, I found my old CB radio rig, which I don't know, when I was about, I don't know, 12 or 13, a friend of mine had set up a Morse code system using CB radio to talk between our computers, which was
Nice.
if I'd only known that I was probably on the
That's a
cusp.
whole lot of clicking that little receiver.
Yeah,
does.
if only I'd known I was on the cusp of developing Wi-Fi, I would have been a rich man now, but I had no idea at that age. But the CB radio still worked, so I had it stuck into my car, and amazingly, there are still people out there on the CB radio. But it got me scratching around in the radio space just to see what was going on, and I came across this interesting school of things, which, from a streaming engineer, seems like a very small step to have taken, but it's created its own entire industry, which I hadn't really appreciated. And there's this entire ecosystem of technologies called network radio, or packet over cellular radio, or sometimes intermingled with PTT because of the press to talk buttons. So you'll be familiar with the sort of classic CB radio. This is a wireless handset, which is kind of the Bluetooth mic thing, and obviously you've got your PTT button. So a lot of the network radio systems, as I dug into them, I realized that they basically have to have a cellular connection. And at first you start thinking, well, why would I do that? I've got a phone in my hand. Why don't I just use it as a phone? But actually, PTT is a different use case for communications. And after playing with it for maybe three weeks now, it took me a little while to appreciate that actually when you have a walkie-talkie system, I mean, essentially what you're doing is emulating walkie-talkies, but you're doing it over the internet. So when you have a walkie-talkie system, you're usually closely active with a defined group of people. With a radio network, they're usually geographically local to you, but obviously with network radio, that requirement dissipates. And when you want to make a statement, you press your button and you talk, and everyone hears it live. And so, unlike asynchronous voice messaging, which you get in WhatsApp or Facebook, where you record a message and let go, and sometime later people hear it, the point of network radio is when you press to talk, everyone hears it. But interestingly, because it is a voice over IP software technology, if someone's moved out of range, when they next come back into range, then they'll get the recent message listed as a replayable digital message, exactly like you might have done, say, in a WhatsApp call and so on. So as I sort of dug into it further, I started realizing this is a big VoIP conference bridge system. It's just being set up in a different use case and so on. And I think the thing that's fascinated me is finding the use case. You know, we've got a bunch of people from the radio show. We sort of set up a cool channel, and we've now got, some of us have gone off and set up family channels as well. And it's a little strange because after moving so heavily from synchronous phone calls into 20 years of email and voicemail and asynchronous messaging, it is quite strange going back to a world where somebody can just page you immediately and butt into your conversation. At first, I found that really counterintuitive. Then I realized that by the time they butted in, I'd already got the message and was giving my answer, and the exchange was done. Where in a classic asynchronous messaging environment, I get a red dot, which actually interrupts me just as much as somebody paging me, distracts me, makes me go in and investigate the message, and then I can formulate my response and make my response. So it actually adds a layer of inefficiency because of the asynchronicity of it. So what's interesting is these PTT radios, sorry to harp on about it, but they did fascinate me. One of the things that's been very interesting is where the IP begins and where it starts streaming and where it moves on and off radio. So one of the key applications for PTT has been in emergency rescue, where you're not quite sure what network you're going to get. You're not quite sure over what geographic area you're going to be covering. So at the higher end, so remember these network radios are basically Android phones, but at a higher with a custom bit of hardware around them. But at a higher end, what people seem to be doing is wrapping them with a UHF radio as well. So what you then end up with they're cross-linked internally, which means that when I make a phone call when I make a network radio call, if I'm talking with 3 people and I can only reach one of them by UHF and my cellular signal's out, that first person to receive my message will receive my message as a digital message, will hear it live, but their system will automatically relay it out onto the network radio over cellular, so everyone on the cellular network can hear the message. So even fringe operators on the edge of your network can drift in and out of the IP network, which is kind of the anchor and the group management and so on. But yeah, fascinating because it's extensive, it's streaming, it's widely used. The businesses involved are all sort of telco scale and hundreds of millions and so on. But it's actually driven by reasonably open source software, a lot of it. It's, deeply fascinating.
Stateside, probably 2 decades ago, around 2 decades ago, maybe a little more, there was a company called Nextel. And Nextel was a phone service provider here in the States that was acquired by Sprint. They had the push to talk, and it was actually used by construction companies. It was used by a number of different industries. Once cellular sort of took over, digital cellular, especially once Nokia had digital phones and Motorola had digital phones, that service fell away. But as you say, it's still, I mean, essentially the spectrum was there for part of the VHF, and then the packet delivery, which is probably no different than 1X-RTT or early 3GP, still sits out there. What's also interesting is if we talk about a technology that's just coming out, ATSC 3.0, in the States for doing multicast television, you bring up an interesting point, Dom, in the fact that if somebody's off net and comes back on, they end up receiving it. That's probably a really nice DVR model for the person who is signed up for an ATSC 3.0 streaming service, which I think is coming within the next year.
These funny niche cases, which when you get really deeply passionate about streaming, you go off and spend a few evenings getting sort of deeply geeked out by. They're fascinating because they
turned off all your news feeds about COVID. You had plenty of time to sit down.
You have no idea how deeply I could let myself fall backwards with blindfold on into the world of software-defined radio. That has deeply excited me, but I also think that might be a fatal mistake before I retire. It's,
I'd like to jump in on your comment. I think there's a couple different areas that you just brought up that are really, the time has come, which is very cool. ATSC 3.0 is no question that the evolution of that is coming into play. The cost of challenges on that is just the cost of the boxes in the homes, to really be able to engage them.
Or in the cars or in the other units that will receive, because I think we're going to see it way beyond just traditional television.
No question. I mean, some of the boxes are coming out of Korea, over the period of time at $300, $400. It's like, you just can't scale on something like that. But like we've discovered when it comes to thumb drives and, different types of devices, we're going to have that. The same thing goes with watches. The ability we wanted to step into data analytics and measurement, our neural networks now. You've got, the ability to really gauge a person's actual connection to programming via their watch. There's some fascinating technologies out there that are moving into the data analytics space, working with the likes of Google and other large organizations, which are kind of creepy in some ways, but incredibly interesting when it comes to media and entertainment. And that is the ability to gauge how the viewer is engaging with their content. And that's like a company called Immersion, that's out of Colorado, that is doing some fascinating work right at the moment. But this could be a wonderful way of going into a very lengthy conversation, but I'm not going to do that. So,
yeah, and in fact, we're at the top of the hour, so we're going to have Dom take us through the rounds. Yeah, what's fascinating, Allan, is I always wonder when we're 10 minutes into this how we're going to fill an hour. And then we get to the end of the hour, and I'm thinking, I could do this for 2, because it's always just fun conversation.
So-
But Dom, go ahead and MC us out here.
Well, we can consider it that we're just warming up for when we reconvene in person, and we can go on into the small hours with a few pints. That's the whole point of SMAF. So, I'm sorry, apologies for the mentioning pints at 9 in the morning for you, Alan, there, but it is nearly pint o'clock for me at 6 o'clock here in the UK. So, with no further ado, I would like to just whiz round the table and say a massive thank you to our guests this week. So, first up, Madelon, thank you so much for spending the time with us. It's been
You're welcome.
good to hear.
It was lovely to be here.
Have you got any interesting webinars or live streams that you're going to be joining over the next few weeks that are on the horizon? It's been busy.
So we're doing it's good that you mentioned that. We're doing a live webinar with Verizon next week.
Cool,
Verizon
excellent.
Media, who we have a partnership with.
And we can
Thanks.
find out about that on your LinkedIn feed or on something along those lines, I hope.
Yeah, you can all, the blog's going live tomorrow, so you can all read about that tomorrow.
Excellent. Looking forward to that. And Alan, I think we've got such a nice picture from you there. I think it's all the geekery behind you. I want to come and forage through your phone collection, but it's been a pleasure to have you on, sir, and great to hear your voice again and see you in person.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And have you got any webcasts or anything particularly you're tuning into over the next couple of weeks before Christmas?
Oh yeah. Involved in a couple more. Like next week, there's an interesting discussion through Brightcove that is going to be addressing, the OTT and what people want, which would be quite interesting. And then a couple more coming up in January and February. But where it really all comes down to is this.
Yeah.
This today has been really, truly fantastic, Dom. Thank you for inviting me, Eric, Tim. Appreciate your consideration. And Madeline, I wish you a wonderful holiday period and Merry Christmas.
Likewise, Ellen, and thank you very much, Dom and Eric and Tim, for hosting me as well. I really much appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Very welcome, very welcome. And I must pop in and check on the boss there, Eric. What have you got coming up over the next few weeks? You must have 350 webcasts a day or something. So
No, that's you. We will have a Streaming Media Connect in February, though, and Alan, I'll be talking to you about that probably yet this week about joining us again for that. Alan was one of our moderators last time, and Tim moderated or hosted or led a fireside chat about the State of Streaming Autumn 2020 report. There may be another research report coming up that we'll be talking about at Streaming Forum or Streaming Media Connect in February. And in the January-February issue of Streaming Media Magazine, I've got an interview with Zoom's CTO, Brendan
it
Nidelson.
happened.
So,
I really want to read that.
yeah, so that's what I've been working on, what I've got coming up. So it's been great talking today. Thanks to both Alan and Madeline for joining us. And Tim, you're next.
Yep,
what are you
Tim.
working on? What's next?
I'm going to set the sawmill this afternoon, so nothing to do with streaming. But no, obviously, as you say, Eric, we've got another. We're doing a meeting tomorrow to talk about the next round, whether it's State of Streaming 2021 winter or whatever we're going to call it.
Right.
So looking forward to seeing how the shift from September, when we did the second survey, to this post-Christmas, early 2021, and see how people are adjusting even further to it.
Cool. So no webcasts, webcasts to jump on.
Before we go, I just want to ask Eric real quick. You've got albums behind you, and you've had somebody staring at us for the entire time, which is full circle of what we've been talking
This is
about.
Laura Marling, one of the best albums of 2020. Just a terrific record.
Fantastic. Love it.
That's perfect. So that's brilliant. I think there's a View from the Edge coming out where I'm extolling the virtues of the explosion of webinars and streaming being done well on the internet. It's become like 24-hour business TV at last about a subject that I'm actually interested in. So although it means lots more competition for SMAF, of course, we're unique in having no agenda and no structure and no formality whatsoever, I hope. So as always, it's been wonderful having our guests and our erstwhile hosts. And I'm going to return you to the doom and gloom of the real world. But of course, we'll be here online. You can find news articles being aggregated on SMAF. We'll be back on Jan 7th with one of the other streaming media writers, Robert Reinhardt. And we will also have with us Natalie Lethbridge. So do join us then. And in the meanwhile, have a brilliant Christmas, Happy New Year. And of course, most importantly, stay safe. See you next time.